The wedding was the kind of event people in town would talk about for years. It was held at an old mansion on the edge of the city, the kind of place with tall white columns and gardens that seemed to go on forever. The bride's family had money, the kind that had been passed down through generations, and they wanted everyone to know it. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. Fresh flowers had been flown in from overseas. The champagne was expensive, and it flowed freely. Over 300 guests filled the grand ballroom that evening. They wore designer clothes and real jewelry. They laughed too loudly and kissed cheeks like old friends, even when they barely knew each other. It was one of those nights where everyone was trying to impress everyone else, and nobody wanted to be caught looking out of place among all this glamour and noise. There was a young woman named Lily. She was 24 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and tired eyes that she tried her best to hide. She wasn't a guest. She was one of the servers, dressed in the standard black uniform that made her blend into the background. That was the point, really. People like her weren't supposed to be noticed. They were supposed to pour drinks, clear plates, and disappear. Lily had been working these catering jobs for almost 2 years now. She picked up shifts on weekends, and sometimes on weekday evenings when she didn't have classes. She was finishing her graduate degree, but paying for it was a constant struggle. Her mother had gotten sick a few years back, and the medical bills had piled up faster than anyone expected. Lily's younger brother was still in high school, and someone had to keep the lights on at home. So she worked. She worked more than she slept, and she never complained about it. Tonight was supposed to be just another job. Show up, do the work, collect the paycheck. She had done dozens of weddings like this one. Rich families, fancy venues, guests who looked right through you like you weren't even there. Lily had learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. It was easier that way. The evening started off smoothly enough. The ceremony had been beautiful, or at least that's what she heard people saying as they moved into the reception hall. The bride looked stunning in her gown, and the groom couldn't stop smiling. There was a live band playing soft music, though Lily noticed that the grand piano in the corner sat empty. She overheard one of the wedding planners mention that the pianist had gotten food poisoning and couldn't make it. They were using recorded music as a backup, and the bride's mother wasn't happy about it. Lily moved from table to table, refilling water glasses and offering appetizers from silver trays. Most guests ignored her completely, which she preferred. A few nodded politely or muttered a quick thank you without making eye contact. That was fine, too. She wasn't there to make friends. But then she reached table 7. There were 6 people seated there, all of them women in their 30s and 40s. They were dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Lily made in a month, and they wore expressions that suggested they knew it. At the center of the group sat a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dress covered in tiny crystals that caught the light every time she moved. Her name was Victoria, though Lily wouldn't learn that until later. What she did notice right away was the way Victoria looked at her. Or rather, looked through her. Victoria was talking loudly about her recent trip to Europe, a villa in the south of France, a private tour of some famous museum. The other women at the table hung on her every word, nodding and gasping at all the right moments. Lily approached quietly and began refilling their champagne glasses. Had just finished pouring for the woman on the silla, and when Victoria snapped her fingers, without even turning around. "You there, server? I need more bread at this table. And make sure it's warm this time?" The last basket was practically cold. Lily nodded. "Of course. I'll bring that right out." She turned to leave, but as she did, her elbow lightly brushed against a handbag that was hanging off the back of Victoria's chair. It was barely a touch, the kind of thing that happens 100 times at crowded events. The bag didn't fall. Nothing spilled. But Victoria reacted like Lily had just knocked over a priceless vase. "Excuse me?" Victoria's voice cut through the noise of the reception. Several people at nearby tables turned to look. "Do you have any idea what that bag costs?" "It's worth more than you probably make in a year." Lily felt her face grow warm. She kept her voice steady. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It won't happen again." But Victoria wasn't finished. She had an audience now, and she seemed to enjoy it. She turned in her chair to face Lily fully, looking her up and down with obvious disgust. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Victoria said to her friends, though her voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You simply cannot find good help anymore. These catering companies will hire anyone off the street. No training, no class, no manners." One of the other women at the table laughed nervously. Another looked down at her plate, uncomfortable. But nobody said anything to stop it. Lily stood frozen. Every instinct told her to apologize again and walk away. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. She needed this job. She needed the money. She couldn't afford to cause a scene. "I'm very sorry," she said again, quieter this time. "I'll get your bread now." She started to turn, but Victoria wasn't done. "Wait a moment. I want to look at you." Victoria's eyes were cold and amused at the same time, like a cat playing with something it had caught. "Tell me, what exactly do you do when you're not spilling things and bumping into people's belongings? What's your big dream? Let me guess. You want to be an actress. Or maybe a singer. All you girls have some fantasy about being discovered." The question hung in the air. Lily said nothing. No? Nothing to say? Victoria laughed and looked around at her friends. "See, this is the problem. No ambition. No drive. People like this just drift through life, serving people like us. And they never amount to anything because they don't have what it takes." Lily's hands were trembling slightly, but she kept them pressed against her sides. She had dealt with rude guests before. She had been talked down to, ignored, and treated like furniture. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the weight of everything she was carrying. Her mother's hospital bills. Her brother's future. Her own dreams that she had pushed aside for so long. She thought about all the late nights she had spent practicing. All the hours and years that had led to something she rarely talked about anymore. A whole part of her life that she had packed away because there simply wasn't room for it. Now Victoria was still talking, still making jokes at Lily's expense. The people at nearby tables were watching, some with pity, others with the same amusement as Victoria. Nobody stepped in to help. The catering manager was across the room, dealing with something else. Lily was on her own dot, and then Victoria noticed the piano dot. It sat in the corner of the ballroom, beautiful and silent. The empty bench in front of it seemed almost sad. Victoria's eyes lit up with a new kind of cruelty. "You know what?" Victoria said slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "I just had the most wonderful idea." Victoria pointed toward the grand piano sitting in the corner of the ballroom. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shining under the soft lights. The kind of piano that belonged in concert halls and music schools. Tonight it sat unused, a reminder that the hired musician had never shown up. "You see that piano over there?" Victoria said, her voice carrying across the nearby tables. More people were watching now. The conversation at table 7 had become a spectacle, and Victoria was clearly enjoying every second of it. Lily followed her gaze to the piano, but said nothing. Her heart was beating a little faster now. She didn't like where this was going. "I have a little theory," Victoria continued, leaning back in her chair like she was about to deliver a grand speech. "I believe that people end up exactly where they belong in life. Some of us are meant to sit at these tables, wearing beautiful things, enjoying the finer side of life. And some people are meant to serve us. It's just the natural order of things. One of the women at the table shifted uncomfortably. Another took a long sip of her champagne, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But still, nobody spoke up. Nobody told Victoria to stop. The difference between us, Victoria went on, looking directly at Lily now, is culture, refinement, education, things that can't be bought at a discount store or learned from the internet. Real sophistication takes generations to develop. It's in the blood. Lily stayed silent. She had learned a long time ago that arguing with people like this only made things worse. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted to feel superior. The best thing to do was let them talk until they got bored and moved on. But Victoria wasn't getting bored. If anything, she was just getting started. "Tell you what," Victoria said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "Let's have a little fun. A demonstration, if you will." She gestured toward the piano again. "That beautiful instrument over there is going to waste tonight. Such a shame. So here's my proposal." She paused for dramatic effect, making sure everyone nearby was listening. "If you can walk over to that piano and play something, anything at all, I will give you $1,000. Cash, right here, right now." Victoria reached into her crystal-covered clutch and pulled out a thick fold of bills, waving them slightly so everyone could see. $1,000 just to play a simple song. How's that for generous? A murmur went through the crowd. People at other tables were openly staring now. The bride's mother, a thin woman with silver hair, looked horrified. She whispered something to the man beside her, probably wondering how to shut this down without making an even bigger scene. Lily felt the weight of all those eyes on her. Her face was hot with embarrassment, but she kept her expression neutral. She had gotten good at that over the years, hiding what she really felt. "And if I can't?" Lily asked quietly. It was the first time she had said anything other than an apology. Victoria's smile widened. She was delighted that Lily had taken the bait. "If you can't," Victoria said slowly, savoring every word, "then you admit, right here in front of everyone, that you are exactly what I said you are. Nothing but hired help. A nobody who should know her place and stay in it. You say those words out loud, and then you go back to pouring champagne like a good little server." The cruelty of it hung in the air. This wasn't about music or money. This was about humiliation. Victoria wanted to prove a point, and she wanted an audience for it. Lily's mind raced. She could refuse. She could simply walk away and pretend none of this had happened. The catering manager would probably understand. These rich guests could be difficult. Everyone knew that. She could finish her shift, collect her payment, and never think about Victoria again. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was the way Victoria had looked at her, like she was less than human. Maybe it was the way everyone else just sat there and watched, too polite or too scared to say anything. Maybe it was all the times Lily had swallowed her pride and kept her head down because that was what survival required. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something she had buried for years because life had gotten too hard and dreams had become a luxury she couldn't afford. "Well?" Victoria pressed. "What do you say? Do we have a deal? Or are you going to scurry back to the kitchen where you belong?" The women at table 7 giggled nervously. A man at the next table shook his head in disapproval, but still didn't say anything. The bride, who had been laughing with her new husband across the room, finally noticed the commotion and looked over with confusion. Lily took a slow breath. Her hands had stopped trembling. Something had shifted inside her, a kind of calm that surprised even herself. "Any peace?" she asked. Her voice was steady now, clearer than before. Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the question. She had expected more resistance, more stammering, more fear. Instead, she was looking at a young woman who suddenly seemed different. Taller, somehow. More present. Any peace at all, Victoria confirmed, recovering her composure. Play Mary at a little lamb for all I care. I just want to see you try. She laughed and looked around at her friends. This should be entertaining. The catering manager had finally noticed what was happening. He was a middle-aged man named Robert who had been running events for over 20 years. He started walking toward table 7, his face tight with concern. This was exactly the kind of situation he was trained to prevent. Confrontations between guests and staff were bad for business. They led to complaints, bad reviews, and sometimes even lawsuits. But before he could reach them, Lily did something unexpected. She set down her serving tray on an empty spot at the table. She straightened her back, and she looked Victoria directly in the eyes. "All right," Lily said simply. "I'll play." Victoria's eyebrows shot up. Whatever she had been expecting, it wasn't this. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. Then she laughed again, louder this time, and clapped her hands together. "Oh, this is too perfect. Did everyone hear that? The little server girl is going to play the piano for us." She gestured grandly toward the instrument. "Please, by all means. The stage is yours." Lily turned and began walking toward the piano. The ballroom seemed to grow quieter with each step she took. Conversations faded. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the recorded music seemed to dim into the background. The catering manager caught up to her halfway across the room. He grabbed her elbow gently and leaned in close. "What are you doing?" He whispered urgently. "You don't have to do this. I can handle her. Just go back to the kitchen and I'll smooth things over." Lily looked at him. For a moment, she considered taking his advice. It would be the sensible thing to do. The safe thing, but she was tired of being safe. "It's okay," she said softly. "I know what I'm doing." Robert searched her face, looking for any sign that she was about to make a terrible mistake. But what he saw there surprised him. There was no panic in her eyes, no desperation, just a quiet certainty that he couldn't quite understand. He let go of her arm and stepped back. Lily continued walking. The grand piano grew closer with each step. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her, waiting to see what would happen next. Some of them pitied her. Some of them were already laughing inside, expecting her to fail. And some of them, just a few, were silently rooting for her without even knowing why. She reached the piano and stood before it for a moment. It really was a beautiful instrument. She ran her fingers lightly along its polished surface, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her touch. Then she pulled out the bench, adjusted its height with practiced ease, and sat down. The ballroom held its breath. Lily sat at the piano bench and let her hands rest in her lap for a moment. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. 300 people were watching, waiting to see what this server girl would do next. Most of them expected her to fumble through something simple and embarrassing. A few notes of chopsticks, maybe, or a clumsy attempt at a melody she half remembered from childhood. Back at table 7, Victoria was already whispering to her friends, barely containing her laughter. This was going to be even better than she had hoped. Not only would this nobody embarrass herself in front of everyone, but Victoria would get to witness it firsthand. It was the perfect end to an already perfect evening. But Lily wasn't thinking about Victoria anymore. She wasn't thinking about the guests or the fancy dresses or the expensive champagne. As she sat there at the piano, something strange happened. The ballroom seemed to fade away. The whispers and the stares and the judgment all melted into the background until there was nothing left but her and the instrument in front of her. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano. She was 5 years old, and her grandmother had taken her to a neighbor's house. The neighbor was an old woman who had once been a music teacher, and she had a small upright piano in her living room. Lily had been fascinated by it. She remembered pressing down on one of the keys and hearing the sound it made. It was like magic. Like the piano was speaking to her Dot, her grandmother had noticed the look on her face. That same week, she had started saving money. It took her almost a year, but eventually she bought a second-hand keyboard from a garage sale. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Lily practiced on that keyboard every single day. She taught herself at first, picking out melodies by ear, figuring out how the notes worked together. Then her grandmother found a retired teacher who agreed to give her lessons for almost nothing. By the time Lily was 10, people were starting to notice. Her teacher said she had a gift, something rare, something that couldn't be taught. She could feel the music in a way that most people never would. It wasn't just about hitting the right notes or keeping the right rhythm. It was about understanding what the music was trying to say and letting it flow through her. She started entering competitions when she was 12. Small local ones at first, and bigger regional events. She won most of them. By 15, she was being talked about as a prodigy. Colleges were already reaching out to her. Music schools offered scholarships. People said she had a real future ahead of her. And then everything changed. Her mother got sick. It started with headaches and tiredness, things that seemed normal at first. But the doctors ran tests, and the tests came back bad. Really bad. The kind of bad that turns your whole world upside down overnight. Lily's father had left when she was young. It had always been just her mother, and her little brother. Now her mother couldn't work, and the bills started piling up. Medical treatments, hospital stays, medications that cost more than their monthly rent. The scholarship offers didn't matter anymore. The competitions didn't matter. What mattered was keeping her family afloat. So Lily did what she had to do. She put her music aside and got a job. Then another job. Then another. She worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons at a retail store, and weekends at catering events like this one. She enrolled in a graduate program because she knew she needed a degree to build any kind of stable future. But she was barely keeping up with her classes. There was never enough time, never enough money, never enough of anything. The piano became something she couldn't afford anymore. Not the lessons, not the practice time, not even the emotional energy it took to sit down and play. Every time she thought about music, she felt a deep ache in her chest. It reminded her of everything she had lost, everything she had given up. But now, sitting at this grand piano in this beautiful ballroom, something was waking up inside her. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The ivory felt cool and familiar beneath her fingers. It had been so long since she had played a real piano. The keyboards at home weren't the same. They didn't have the weight, the resonance, the soul of a true instrument. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was back in her grandmother's kitchen, listening to old recordings of classical music on a scratchy radio. She was in her first teacher's cramped apartment, learning about composers who had lived hundreds of years ago, but whose music still made people cry. She was on stage at her first big competition, hands trembling, but heart absolutely certain. She thought about all the nights she had stayed up late practicing when she should have been sleeping. All the sacrifices her grandmother had made to give her a chance. All the dreams she had carried with her before life got too heavy, and she had to set them down. This moment wasn't about Victoria. It wasn't about proving anything to these strangers who didn't know her and would forget her by tomorrow. This was about something else entirely. This was about remembering who she was. Lily opened her eyes. The ballroom was still there. The guests were still watching. Victoria was still smirking at table 7, but none of it mattered. Any more. She knew exactly what she was going to play. It was a piece by Chopin. Ballade number 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful piano compositions ever written. Professional pianists spent years mastering it. It required not just technical skill, but emotional depth. The ability to tell a story without words. The ability to make people feel something they couldn't quite name. Lily had learned this piece when she was 17, during what she now thought of as her golden year. The year before everything fell apart. She had performed it at a national competition and won first place. One of the judges, an old man who had been teaching music for 50 years, had come up to her afterward with tears in his eyes. He told her that in all his decades of listening to young musicians, he had never heard anyone play with so much heart. She hadn't touched the piece since then. It hurt too much to even think about it. But tonight, in this moment, it felt right. It felt necessary. She positioned her fingers over the opening notes. The ballroom was completely silent now. Even Victoria had stopped whispering. There was something in the air, a tension that everyone could feel, but nobody could explain. Something was about to happen. Something important. Lily pressed down on the first key. A single note rang out, pure and clear, cutting through the silence like a beam of light through darkness. It hung in the air for a moment, beautiful and lonely. Then came the second note, and the third. And slowly, gently, the music began to unfold. At first, it was soft, delicate, like a whisper or a secret being shared between old friends. The melody floated through the room, touching something deep inside everyone who heard it. Conversations that had started to resume fell silent again. People who had been reaching for their drinks froze with their hands in midair. This wasn't what anyone had expected. This wasn't a clumsy attempt at a simple song. This was something else entirely. This was real music. The kind that gets under your skin and makes your heart beat differently. Lily's fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her eyes were half closed, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the piece. She wasn't performing anymore. She was simply letting the music flow through her, the way water flows through a riverbed. Natural, inevitable, unstoppable. And the room, all 300 guests in their expensive clothes and their important lives, fell completely under her spell. The music filled every corner of the ballroom. It rose up to the crystal chandeliers and swept across the marble floors. It wrapped around the guests like a warm blanket on a cold night. And it came from the fingers of a young woman in a server's uniform, who wasn't supposed to be anything special. Lily played like she had never stopped, like the years of silence and sacrifice had never happened. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and passion, bringing Chopin's masterpiece to life in a way that made time itself seem to slow down. The piece started gently, but it didn't stay that way. That was the beauty of this particular composition. It was a journey. It began with tenderness, with longing, with a kind of sadness that didn't need words to be understood. Then it built. Layer upon layer, the music grew more complex, more intense, more alive. There were moments of quiet reflection, followed by explosions of emotion. There were passages that sounded like rain falling on a window, and others that sounded like a storm tearing through the sky. The music told a story of love and loss, of hope and heartbreak, of all the things that make us human. And Lily lived every single note. Her body moved with the music as if they were one. Her shoulders rose and fell with the swells of the melody. Her head tilted as she listened to the notes she was creating, adjusting, feeling, responding. This wasn't just playing. This was breathing. This was existing in a way that most people never get to experience. Across the room, the guests sat frozen in their seats. Champagne glasses hung in the air, forgotten. Forks rested on plates, untouched. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody did anything except listen. The bride, a young woman who had spent months planning every detail of this perfect day, stood near the edge of the dance floor, with tears streaming down her face. She didn't know why she was crying. The music just reached inside her and pulled something out. Something real. Something she didn't even know was there. Her new husband stood beside her, his arm around her waist, watching the server girl at the piano with complete amazement. He had been to concerts before. He had heard professional musicians play in fancy halls. But he had never experienced anything like this. There was something raw and honest about it. Something that couldn't be faked or learned from a textbook. At table 7, the atmosphere had changed completely. Victoria's smirk was gone. Her face had turned pale, and her perfectly painted lips were pressed into a thin line. She wasn't laughing anymore. She wasn't whispering cruel jokes to her friends. She was staring at Lily with an expression that was hard to read. Shock, maybe, or disbelief, or something deeper that she would never admit to. The other women at the table were equally stunned. One of them had her hand pressed over her mouth. Another was blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears. They had expected a joke. They had expected to laugh at this poor server who had been foolish enough to accept Victoria's challenge. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The catering manager, Robert, stood near the kitchen entrance with his arms crossed over his chest. He had worked hundreds of events over the years. He had seen celebrities, politicians, millionaires. He had been present for marriage proposals, anniversary celebrations, family reunions. But he had never seen anything quite like this. He thought about the young woman he had hired 2 years ago. She had been quiet and hardworking, always showing up on time, never complaining, never causing problems. He knew she was a student, but he didn't know much else about her life. She kept to herself, did her job, and went home. Now he realized there was so much more to her story, so much she had been carrying in silence. The music reached its most intense passage. Lily's fingers flew across the keys at an impossible speed, hitting every note with perfect accuracy. The sound swelled until it seemed like the very walls of the ballroom were vibrating. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and almost too much to take in. And then, gradually, it began to soften again. The storm passed. The intensity faded. What remained was something gentle and heartbreaking. A melody that sounded like saying goodbye, like watching someone you love walk away, like remembering something precious that you can never get back. Lily poured everything she had into these final moments. All the pain of the last few years, all the dreams she had buried, all the late nights working double shifts and early mornings studying for exams, all the times she had wanted to give up but didn't, all the love she had for her mother and her brother and her grandmother, who had believed in her when nobody else did. She thought about her grandmother now, the woman who had saved up for a year to buy her that first keyboard, the woman who had sat beside her during practice sessions, clapping and smiling even when Lily hit wrong notes, the woman who had passed away 2 years ago, just a few months before Lily's mother got sick. She never got to see how good Lily had become. She never got to see her perform in the big competitions or hear the praise from the famous teachers. But Lily liked to think she was watching somehow, that she was up there somewhere, looking down with that warm smile she always had. This performance was for her grandmother, for everyone who had ever believed in her. The final notes of the piece were soft and slow. Each one was deliberate, meaningful, like the last words of a conversation you don't want to end. Lily held the final chord for a long moment, letting it ring out and fade naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys. For what felt like forever, nobody moved. The ballroom was completely still. The silence was so deep that you could hear the candles flickering on the tables. You could hear the distant hum of the air conditioning. You could hear your own heartbeat if you listened closely enough. Lily sat at the piano with her hands in her lap, her head slightly bowed. She didn't look up. She didn't turn around. She just sat there, breathing, coming back to herself after being somewhere else entirely. And then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone started to clap. It was a single pair of hands at first. Slow, hesitant, almost uncertain. Then another pair joined in, and another. And suddenly, the whole ballroom erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, the kind you do at the end of a speech because you're supposed to. This was something else. This was real. This was 300 people responding to something that had moved them in ways they didn't fully understand. People rose from their seats. A standing ovation, spontaneous and genuine. The applause grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Some people were cheering. Others were wiping tears from their eyes. The bride was openly sobbing now, clinging to her husband and laughing at the same time. Lily finally looked up. She turned on the bench and saw the crowd on their feet. She saw the tears and the smiles and the looks of absolute wonder. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. This wasn't something she had prepared for. She had just wanted to play. She had just wanted to remember who she was. She stood slowly, her legs a little unsteady. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. She didn't know whether to bow or wave or simply walk away. So she just stood there, taking it all in, letting the moment wash over her. And across the room, at table 7, Victoria sat completely still. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. She was just staring at Lily with an expression that had shifted from shock to something else entirely, something that looked a lot like shame. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity. Lily stood beside the piano, still trying to process what had just happened. Her heart was pounding, and her hands were trembling slightly, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else entirely. Relief, maybe, or joy, or the strange feeling of coming home after being lost for a very long time. People started moving toward her. The bride was the first to reach her, rushing across the dance floor with her white gown trailing behind her. She threw her arms around Lily without saying a word, hugging her tightly like they were old friends instead of strangers. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," the bride whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Lily hugged her back, surprised by the warmth of the gesture. "I'm glad you liked it," she said softly. It felt strange to be speaking again after losing herself so completely in the music. The groom appeared beside his new wife, shaking his head in disbelief. "Where did you come from?" he asked with a laugh. "Seriously, where have you been hiding?" Before Lily could answer, more guests crowded around her. They wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were, to ask questions about her background and her training. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. For so long, she had been invisible. Just another server in a black uniform. Now everyone wanted to know her name. Through the crowd, Lily noticed an older woman making her way toward her. She was elegantly dressed, with silver hair pinned up in a graceful twist and a string of pearls around her neck. There was something different about the way she moved, a quiet confidence that suggested she was someone important. But it was her eyes that caught Lily's attention. They were filled with tears. The woman stopped in front of Lily and studied her face for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I know you," she said quietly. "I've seen you before." Lily frowned, trying to place the woman's face. She didn't recognize her from any of the catering events she had worked. Maybe she was a friend of one of her old teachers? 3 years ago, the woman continued. Warsaw, the International Chopin Competition. You performed this same piece in the final round." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "You won." The words hit Lily like a wave. The International Chopin Competition. It felt like a lifetime ago. Another version of herself, from a world she had been forced to leave behind. "I was there," the woman said. "I was in the audience. I watched you play, and I have never forgotten it. I told my husband that night that I had just witnessed something extraordinary. And now here you are, serving at a wedding, and I almost didn't recognize you until you sat down at that piano." The crowd around them had grown quiet, listening intently. People exchanged confused glances. The server had won an international competition? What was happening? "I'm sorry," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things changed. My family needed me. I had to stop." The woman reached out and took Lily's hands in hers. Her grip was warm and firm. "Life is hard," she said simply. "It takes things from us. Things we love. Things we need. But talent like yours doesn't just disappear. It waits. And tonight, I think it was waiting for exactly this moment." Lily didn't know what to say. She felt tears burning at the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had spent so long being strong, holding everything together, that she had almost forgotten how to let herself feel. The commotion had drawn attention from all corners of the ballroom. Word was spreading quickly. The server was actually a world-class pianist. She had won international competitions. She had given up everything to take care of her family. The story moved through the crowd like electricity, changing the way people looked at her. And then, from the back of the room, another figure approached. It was a man in his 50s, tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression. He walked with purpose, cutting through the crowd until he stood directly in front of Lily. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. "My name is Dr. Harrison," he said. "I'm the head of the music department at the university. I've been searching for someone like you for a very long time." Lily stared at the card in his hand. It had the university's logo embossed in gold, along with his name and contact information. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Not to people like her. "I want to offer you a full scholarship," he continued. "Tuition, housing, everything covered. You would finish your degree while studying piano with our best instructors. We would give you every opportunity to rebuild your career." The bride gasped. Several people in the crowd started murmuring excitedly. Lily felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. She had walked into this ballroom tonight, expecting nothing more than a few hours of work and a small paycheck. Now her entire life was changing right in front of her. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," the older woman with the pearls urged gently. "Say yes and don't look back." Before Lily could respond, there was movement at table 7. Victoria had finally risen from her seat. She walked slowly toward the group, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The crowd parted to let her through, watching with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Victoria stopped a few feet away from Lily. Her face was unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out the fold of cash she had waved around earlier. $1,000, just as she had promised. "You won," Victoria said flatly. "A deal is a deal." She held out the money toward Lily. The gesture was stiff, almost mechanical. There was no apology in her voice, no warmth in her eyes. But there was something else. A crack in the armor she wore so carefully. A glimpse of something human beneath all that coldness. Lily looked at the money for a moment. Then she gently pushed Victoria's hand away. "Keep it," she said calmly. "I didn't do this for you." A ripple went through the crowd. Someone near the back actually laughed. Victoria's face flushed red, but she said nothing. She just stood there, holding her money, looking more foolish than she probably ever had in her life. Lily turned back to the professor and the older woman. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it. I'll take the scholarship." The ballroom erupted in cheers. The bride hugged her again. The professor shook her hand vigorously. The catering manager, Robert, stood off to the side with a huge smile on his face, looking like a proud father watching his daughter graduate. For the rest of the evening, Lily didn't serve anyone. The bride and groom insisted she stay as a guest, and no one argued. Someone found her a chair near the head table, and people kept coming by to introduce themselves and congratulate her. A woman who ran a local concert venue gave her a business card. A music critic asked if he could write a story about her. It was surreal and wonderful, and almost too much to take in. But the moment Lily would remember most clearly came later, near the end of the night. The crowd had thinned out, and the band was playing soft music for the last few dancers. Lily walked back over to the piano and sat down one more time. She didn't play anything complicated this time. Just a simple melody, something her grandmother had taught her when she was small. The notes drifted through the room, soft and sweet, like a lullaby for the end of a long day. As she played, she thought about everything that had happened, the cruelty and the kindness, the challenges and the chances, the way life could break you down and build you back up in the same breath. She thought about her mother, still fighting, still holding on. Her brother, studying hard, dreaming his own dreams. Her grandmother, gone but never forgotten. And she thought about herself. Not the server, not the struggling student, but the musician, the artist, the girl who had once believed she could do something extraordinary. That girl had never really disappeared. She had just been waiting for the right moment to come back. Lily finished the song and let the final note hang in the air. Then she smiled, closed the piano lid gently, and walked out into the night. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin.